Welcome back to another episode of On Deck with Haversine Funding. I'm your host, Nolan Reichert. I'm joined by my co-host, Jen Merritt.
Thank you for having me back.
Thank you for joining. Today we have two very special guests. Our first one has 15 years of experience in the specialty finance industry. She was nominated as one of the top women in ABL leadership by ABF Journal. She was also nominated and received the award for the SF Net's 40 Under 40 in 2020. Meredith Carter, the president and CEO of Edge, as well as the chief legal officer. Meredith, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Our next guest has 25 years of experience in ABL. She was also recognized as one of the top women in commercial finance by the ABF Journal. She has launched a fintech and ABL platform, Internex Capital. Lin Chua, the co-founder and president of Internex Capital. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'd love to hear a little bit about your background and, introduce our viewers and our audience to kind of how you got started and to the point of where you are to launching your fund.
Sure. By way of background, as you mentioned, Nolan, I started my specialty finance career in patent litigation funding. Going from that sort of niche space to asset-based lending was a transition. And the impetus for that is we sold the litigation funding business, and one of the lenders or investors in that business is also an investor in Edge. So they asked me upon that sale to take a look at this asset-based lending portfolio that they had that never lost a penny, but never really grew past a couple of loans. To which I said, I know nothing about asset-based lending, but willing to dig in and figure it out. I guess similarly to when I was doing litigation, you kind of have to figure things out quickly. And I really liked the space initially. I thought it was really ripe for disruption. Being an outsider, seeing that a lot of things had been done the same way for a very long period of time. And in asking questions of why have we done things this way, the answer a lot of times was, well, because we've always done it that way, as opposed to, thinking about things a little more novelly. So the investors backed a plan for me to really roll this out over a couple of years, where the first year we dedicated ourselves to building out the back office and getting a core team in place without having the pressure to bring in any loans. I think that helped us build a really strong foundation that we built on top of. And then the second year we started bringing in our business development team, and we've been growing pretty quickly ever since.
Yes, and similar, but also very different in a way. I had been practicing as an attorney originally, but then after that at GE Capital for over a decade. And at that point in time, which was towards the end of what everyone saw as the GE Capital big bubble, we were looking at the landscape of realizing that there would be changes, dramatic changes at GE Capital, perhaps even right before that, just because I was already in the know of some of that information. And then on the other side of it, this was the fintech landscape where we were hearing about the lending clubs, the on deck, and fintech was still a really new word at that point in time in the industry. And we looked at what we were doing at GE Capital. We knew asset-based lending very well, but how do we take those methodologies that we knew of ABL very well and combine it with this so-called new fintech space that was at that point in time brand new and evolving. And so the impetus behind starting Internex is really to combine what we like to think about as those two, the traditional old school risk methodologies that we know well, together with the really cutting edge technologies that we were given the joy and luxury of being able to white paper and build from scratch. And then on a more personal note, for me at that juncture, as we were figuring out what was going to happen with GE Capital and everything that was going on with SIFIs, et cetera, I had received a very attractive offer to join another very large bank. And I think at that juncture, on a personal note, that was when I really reconsidered whether I really wanted to jump in and dedicate another 10, 20 years to another large bank, or whether I was ready for a different adventure. And my business partner and I Paul Di Domenico. That was when Internex came to place. And for us, this is an adventure we have never looked back on. And it's one that I'm still feeling very privileged and excited about on a daily basis.
It's pretty impressive. I mean, all kidding aside, your backgrounds are impressive, but you've also both, gone and entered the ABL space, launched your own firms,
Hmm.
built them, and have grown pretty successfully. Y'all are names that people know. The companies are
Yep.
well known. Y'all have great reputation. So, again, just thank you for being with us today and taking the time, and you'll go from there.
Yeah, it's very impressive, as Jen mentioned, what you guys do. Obviously, it wasn't easy. There were a lot of bumps in the roads, I'm sure. What was Meredith? Kind of what was the driving force behind wanting to start Edge? And then, in addition, what were some of the challenges in that experience that you had?
Sure. So the investors behind Edge have a trading background, and any area where they feel that they can bring Edge to a market by doing things a little bit differently, hence the name change, was is remains an appealing strategy to them. So thinking about things differently in the context of an industry that hadn't seen much change for a really long time seemed like an exciting opportunity to them. And then to me, when I started digging into it a bit, and some challenges along the way, I think one of the first challenges was being located in Philadelphia. Unless people had roots in Philadelphia, it was really hard to get talent to come to Philadelphia. I think pretty early on, even before COVID, we decided to be a permanently remote organization to take advantage of the talent throughout the country, and learning to be very purposeful in our communications, very intentional in terms of the point of meetings, but also making time for small talk and building a culture remotely was a challenge that we learned pretty early on in the process and continue to evolve even today.
Yeah, as you mentioned, the working remote, that's something that a lot of groups had to adapt to. Is, not many groups were remote before COVID, and then COVID kind of forced us into that situation where you had to adapt. But it definitely sounds like you were a little bit ahead of the curve. You had some experience, and it helps having a great team that's able kind of to adjust to those changes and that experience. Lynn, I'd love to hear a little bit about what your driving force was and what some of the challenges you experienced were.
Right. I think for us, the biggest, I would say, decision point at the start was really figuring out whether we wanted to go out on our own or whether we wanted to align ourselves with one of the sponsors. We were receiving quite a good number of excellent opportunities there to align with the sponsor, but it would change the nature of what we were trying to do and start up. And that was probably the hardest decision we made. And it came with pros and cons on both sides. Clearly, the biggest benefit of aligning with a sponsor is that you had equity and you had liquidity immediately, and you had access to that funding. And when we decided to go out on our own, the hardest challenge, frankly, was the capital markets, that we had to raise everything right down to equity to pay your light bills was really everything that we grew and had to raise on our own. And so that was a huge learn on several fronts. It was us putting in our own sweat money in, as well as us really going through to our friends and family and going to the wider professional relationships that we had. So that was, I would say, a lesson that allowed me to grow in so many ways, especially coming from somewhere like GE Capital. And then prior to that, I was at a large law firm, Simpson Thacher, where I'm used to, in both cases, being the 800-pound gorilla in the room. And suddenly I was the smallest, most insignificant person in the room, and having to then get people convinced to join us on this journey. So those were challenging and, if you wish, risky, but extremely exciting, and definitely a lot of teaching moments there.
Mhm. Yeah, that's definitely a challenge and a hurdle. I think, you know, a lot of people have the idea and the conception to start their own group, and that a lot of times is often overlooked. Is okay, well, where
How
am I getting my
hard is that
capital
going to
from, and
be?
how hard is it going to be to convince people who just met me, to join this journey? What's something that you if you could go back in time and tell yourself then, well, something that you learn knowing now, that you could share with us.
I'd say maybe two things, if I may, because both of them are equally important to me. One with them was that it is extremely hard till you get your very, very first anchor. And then after that, it does get dramatically better. And it's easy to hear that, but it's hard when you're still not yet at your first. And to hear that it will get better. So that was a huge piece that when we finally were able to clinch our first sets of investors, it was still a lot of hard work, but things changed. And then when you couple that with time and performance and delivering of returns, then things change a lot faster after that. That's one. I'd say the other piece is really just to stay authentic to yourself as you go out and try to find the ability of people and try to find liquidity for people to invest in you, whether it is debt, equity, or otherwise. Really staying authentic was probably the best advice I ever received. And we knew who we were, we knew our strengths, we knew our weaknesses, and it was really being authentic about it that allowed us to finally then find the right partners that were a good fit for us, both for our strengths and our weaknesses, to then take us forward.
Mhm. Yeah, staying consistent and true to the vision.
Mhm.
Really, I mean, if you practice those two things, you really can't go wrong. And look at you now, 9 years later, with consistency and staying true. You've built something great. Meredith, you kind of touched on the working remote was one of the big challenges. Um, what's something that you could go back in time and kind of tell yourself, or something you've learned from that? And it doesn't have to be just working remote, but any challenge that you had while building your group.
Um, I would say one of the challenges and what I learned from it along the way are similar to what Lynn said about being true to yourself. We now, when hiring people, lead with our non-negotiables, and we have them actually published on our website as to who we are and who we aren't. So we try to find our people at the end of the day. I think along the way, we've been very fortunate that we've retained amazing people from the beginning, coming from what was essentially a small startup with 2 loans. But there were a couple of times that I learned make sure people are on board with the mission and aren't trying to superimpose what they did at their prior workplace, especially if it was a bank, onto what we're doing now. To really be looking forward, thinking about how to do things differently, and be excited by that change, not just going along for the ride.
Right. Was there anything that kind of caught you off guard, or was you didn't plan for or expect in this journey? I'm sure there's more
Like,
than
there's
one.
probably a
Yeah, yeah,
lot.
all of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A surprise for me along the way is that I was really amazed to see how many people were also willing to help. However hard it was, that there were a lot of friends, in fact, people that I didn't know were friends, but were willing to help because they saw what we were doing was difficult. I mean, that I found really amazing. So not just people who are vested, but especially those who are vested, but even outside of that, the number of friends that I've made along the way and journey, it's just amazing. So that's been a true surprise and really gratifying. And it's really, for me, enforced the importance and the value of that network within our industry. That's just so key, because I've met so many tremendously helpful and amazing people.
That's a good point. There's a lot of people that will help anybody. And I feel like we meet those people every day. And I think most of us are only, yes, we all work hard and take advantage of opportunities, but the people that we encounter and the relationships we make along the
Yep.
way
Mhm.
really can make a lasting difference on who we become in the future. And so
Right.
I like that.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, there's so much impact on the people that you surround yourself from. I mean, from birth to now, they have such a great impact on you, and when you are building out your team, the friends that you have around you, the family, it really goes a long ways. Both of you have unique and inspiring approaches to the groups that you built. When you're looking at technology or inclusivity, how are some of those how did that help mold your company into what it is today, Meredith?
Sure. We spent a lot of time in our hiring process really getting to know the candidates. And part of that process is doing an analysis on their communication style and workplace motivators to see what sort of fit they might be for the broader team and also the specific team that they might be joining. So we're very open about what each of us are good at and where our blind spots are. And whenever we try to hire someone else for a specific group, we try to fill in whatever the blind spots may be in that group. And I found that that's been really helpful in building a team that's well-rounded, comes from a variety of perspectives, and in total can represent the diversity of people in the world and how they think. So it's not perceived one way or another depending on your natural communication style. We have someone else sitting on the other side of the wheel that we could always turn to say, hey, how might this be perceived from where you're sitting in the organization or with your values, as not to unnecessarily offend someone, to try to get better at what we're doing. It's super important to get a variety of viewpoints and not all viewpoints that you agree with. I think that's the most important thing, to promote a culture of transparency where people are encouraged to push back and share different ideas.
Yeah, I think when you work with, I'm blessed. I work with Jen.
You don't
When
have
there's
to
that
say
level
that.
of trust and transparency, it shows, and you can tell, and that's a huge part of the culture and how it's built. Lynn, how has that shaped your group?
On inclusivity, specifically, I'd say we try to address it in a number of ways. Kind of like Meredith, we start off with wanting to make sure that we have a very diverse, or the willingness to adopt and listen to a diverse level of opinions. And I think that comes a little bit from our GE Capital side of the team, where we're used to putting on a very large cross-functional team when you discuss a particular topic, just so that you will engineer that ability to bring different viewpoints and that debate as a result that comes out of it. So we are a group that very much fosters that kind of team debate and conversation. And then on the softer side, the diversity side goes beyond just the work side and opinions. It also goes into, for instance, having an outside. Are we having meals beyond the standard business lunch that we all might be used to, and taking a risk with some cross-cultural lunches that others might be less comfortable with? And I think all in all, at the end of the day, it's more about not only just talking the talk, but also walking the walk. And for us, we try to really focus on the people and the talent that we are hiring. I have been known to say we like to focus on hiring the best athletes. And if we focus well on that, I am so amazingly surprised that the diverse pool has kind of emerged by itself. So more than 60% of our employee pool are diverse. And that is not us actively using any one policy or another, but really just focusing on hiring the best athletes. And likewise, when it comes to our making decisions with clients and with prospects, we again focus on what we think is right about the business, what is right about that portfolio, what is right about that collateral, instead of, if you wish, going into other aspects that might be less relevant. And to that point, approaching half of our portfolio are women and minority-owned businesses. So it is an exciting piece of our business, as you talk about diversity and inclusivity, and we continue to see that to be a big focus. And then the other piece you mentioned on technology, that was very much the founding piece of our business when we decided to really drive technology through what we did at GE Capital. So technology investments for us are very much a part of our ongoing. They're continuous, and we are shamelessly a believer in data analytics. We invest in it. It's not just a cost center. We actively prioritize our tech and data analytics investments and our budgets accordingly.
That is, it sounds like that was kind of your background, when you helped launch the fintech group, but we're seeing a lot of more groups being driven by technology. There's unlimited access out there to I feel like, when I'm scrolling through my LinkedIn or I'm reading any news articles, half the time there's some new tech to try, or new software that someone's rolling out. I think that plays such an important role in when you're looking at efficiencies or capabilities, implementing those processes. And
And scaling,
right,
right? So,
exactly, yeah.
but y'all were, I mean, you created your own, and so you have your own system, and now you have all that time to show that history. And
Hmm.
so anyone that's out there now that's starting, they have to do exactly what you've already done and paved the way for. So
Absolutely. Since it's International Women's History Month, I'm really curious to hear what your thoughts or advice that you would have to women that are in the industry and looking to expand their roles, or women that are not in the industry and are looking to get in, Meredith.
Don't be afraid to take risks. I think Lynn and I both did that in moving from different careers. I'm sure it didn't go without thought on Lynn's side either. But I mean, my process was thinking about what the worst thing that could happen would be if I didn't take this versus taking it, and I sort of give the advice to people thinking of making a change. A couple things, write your resume backwards, see if the place that you stop next offers the bullet points that you would want to add to that resume. And what would happen is it a net positive or a negative if you end up taking it and it doesn't work out? What options would you have foreclosed by taking that path?
Lynn, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
On advice
Yeah, on
to
advice
young
you would
women that
give.
is starting, I think I have one that is similar, it's somewhat similar in threat to Meredith, maybe a little bit different. And I believe in trusting your gut. I do think that your intuition tells you a lot more. And I think having that faith to trust your gut, or as I call it, even though I'm a big believer in artificial intelligence and data analytics, trust the human intelligence, and it will take you to where it needs to go.
Mhm. You mentioned artificial intelligence and analytics, kind of rolling off of that. How has those two things, um, what's the influence that it played in your group that you started?
Yeah, it's been a big influence for us. It really had a role in us deciding how we would set up our initial tech infrastructure as we thought about data, the data that we would be amassing, and what it would mean for us as we developed more of that. So I would say that it is, and analytics becomes more powerful over time, as we all are seeing. And there is clearly a huge push right now in the general marketplace for AI. But we do think, like a lot of things with technology, we're only at the early stages of seeing its impact on the marketplace, including in asset-based lending. So for what we can do with it, we do think that we are on the cutting edge of using our data analytics and our technology to help drive some of the visibility and the decision making and information that we have. But beyond that, layering that with a sensible dose of the human intelligence, I think is key at this stage, especially as we develop into the next gen of AI and data analytics.
Mhm. Yeah,
I
that's
would agree with Lynn. I think that they don't need to be mutually exclusive. We spend a lot of time focusing on how we make decisions and using decision trees and decision sciences to help us inform our decision making. But that doesn't take away the human element. It just gives us a baseline to compare our decisions against in a given context. We also spend a lot of time and resources on AI and analytics. We hired a head of technology and data analytics a little over a year ago to really focus on this and help take us to the next level. This summer, we are working on creating our own sort of internal system on data capture and AI that we can then, have in a vacuum and learn from and query, as opposed to going to the wider internet. But I think having all of this data really helps us make better decisions in the future. It's what are the best potential borrowers and why? How do we reach out to a larger amount of targeted borrowers to increase the addressable audience? What steps can we automate along the lines of a process so we can focus our people on more, human intuition or analytics as opposed to the administrative side of things. What sort of efficiencies as well as portfolio management tools can we help increase in our portfolio so we can better monitor things, spot trends, and give data back to our borrowers so we can do more than just providing capital.
Add value in that too. I do. There's so many people out there trying different forms. I agree, Lynn. It's like there's all these new tools and everyone's trying to figure out which ones are the best ones to use, and you don't really know yet. So I know even in our group, we're all using different ones, trying to implement them in unique different ways just to see, because we don't know who's going to come out with the best thing later. It's still early on. And Meredith taking those tools and using it as a tool, not replacing our thought process, but making our time more efficient. I think there's a lot of groups that are working on that. Sounds like you started already as well a while ago, if you hired someone to handle that whole program last year. And most people are just starting that now. And I don't think they're thinking as broadly. I mean, we ourselves are starting stuff like that, but it's not, but you're definitely ahead on that. So I'm very excited to see where it all goes. I mean, there's good and bad, right? It's just keeping that common sense piece with it. So.
Right. Yeah. I think there's so many ways that we can use all this new technology, and it's fascinating to hear the different ways that your groups are using it. And I think a lot of our viewers can kind of take some of the information you're sharing and kind of thinking, well, how can we use this in our day to day? Everyone loves to hear kind of the tips and tricks that people are utilizing for efficiencies.
There's a lot that goes into it, though. You got to plan, you got to implement, you have to make it an all-time, like full-time project. It's not when you think about it. So,
right.
And data is only as good as the input. So that's a big challenge to make sure everyone is bought into, adding their data in a consistent way and understanding the importance of it.
Continue to learn and build off of that. Meredith, one of the things that you mentioned you were using it for was to track trends. So kind of shifting there, what are you seeing in the ABL industry? What are some of the trends that you're noticing?
The trends I was referring to were more on a borrower level or industry level. But pivoting to that, I do think some trends in the past couple of years, banks have, really over the last year and a half, banks seem to have been pulling back a little bit, where as of a couple of years ago, we seem to be competing with community banks for loans. We're not really seeing that as much now. I think banks are opening up certainly to lending again, maybe unlike this time last year in the case of some, or a little past this time of the year. But I think it's going to be a really good time, or it is a really good time to be in this market. And if you can offer something in addition to just capital, or you can do things in a different way where you can really dig in and understand the business of the borrower and not just try to offer them, your one solution, I think there's a lot of value add that we as an industry can add to help these borrowers through some difficult times.
Yeah. Lynn, what are you seeing right now in the ABL industry?
It's definitely a very good market right now in general for the ABL space. There's a lot of opportunity as the banks pull back, and we certainly are wanting to make sure that we take advantage of these opportunities in a sensible way, with or without the upcoming soft landing or no landing at all, from the sense of it, that we're hearing out in the marketplace. That's right. And I think in terms of how we're figuring out how to adapt to it, it's staying true to ourselves. We've always focused on flexibility as one of our strengths, and the data analytics that we have giving us the ability to go that extra mile because of the visibility we have. So really honing in on that so that we are in a position to take advantage of the opportunities that the market is giving us for this point in time. So that's probably a big piece of what we're focusing on.
Have y'all seen, because we've seen it across the lenders we work with as well, and y'all are saying that same thing, the market has gotten busier, more transactions are moving in from banking to non-banking or private credit. Are there any other challenges with that? Are there increased delinquencies that you're seeing or have heard of? Are there deals more challenging to underwrite, so you have more of them, but you have to work hard. Are there any other trends that y'all are experiencing, and how are y'all counteracting those or reacting to those?
There are certainly a lot of interesting trends that are emerging that we are following closely, such as the fact that Amazon recently pulled back from business
Yes.
lending. I think it's a big change in the marketplace. So we are certainly looking closely at all the underwriting models, and things are performing very well, but also ensuring that we are looking beyond corners and thinking ahead of it for what might come in the future. So that's a big piece of it. And I think a lot of groups are. The question is to what extent and at what speed. So we're trying to make sure that we're ahead of the curve as opposed to being reactive.
Right. So just being proactive to look at kind of what might be going on.
Did you have anything to add to that, Meredith?
I would say it's increasingly more important to stay on top of trends that might not specifically impact your borrower. There could be in the aggregate macroeconomic trends that are sort of unprecedented that could affect your entire portfolio in ways that you might not expect.
It sounds like both of you are getting ahead of the curve, and kind of just looking in
Yes.
general of how you have built out your platforms. That seems to be a common theme.
Right.
From a technology standpoint, it seems like you guys kind of were ahead of the curve. So I kind of want to give you props for expecting and planning and preparing. I think a lot of our viewers and listeners that have platforms that are scaling and growing really can take something from that, and kind of steal some of the ideas that you have to implement them in their group from a technology standpoint, implement from a planning and preparing. um, Kind of some takeaways I'd love to hear, whether that's key takeaways or life mantras, mottos that you could share with us, Meredith.
So I have a quote sitting above my computer that I
Hmm.
consider a mantra. Think about the metric by which your life will be judged and make a resolution to live every day. So in the end, your life will be judged a success. That's from Clayton Christensen. I think it's a really important part of people young and old in their career to figure out what you're doing it for and what gets you up every day. For me, it's a couple of things. On the industry level, I really like looking at things in an objective, novel way. I learned a long time ago that the idea of going into a company where you're handed a binder with the extent of your role and responsibilities is just not me. I'd rather go into a mess and clean it up and feel a sense of accomplishment every day. And on the personal side of business, I'm just focusing on business, is really finding people who are extremely talented in specific areas and trying to cut down as many barriers as possible so that they can be their best selves. And
Love that.
that not only is good from a business perspective, but nothing makes me happier from a work perspective when I see people really coming into their own and having those aha moments. But overall, I would say it's my family and my two children, to give a little bit more of a basic answer, but that's what gets me up every day, and I hope
That's your
that I
why.
can
Yeah.
role,
Yeah.
yeah, to them.
And I love
In
that as you're talking about each of these things, you keep getting more excited. You
I
can
know.
see it from
Yeah.
how you're making an impact on the people that you work with and helping them and giving the tools that they need so they can maximize everything and execute and not just play their one role, but really be a full partner in the business in that sense. So, and you can tell that you love it just based on just how you're showing up. So
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
yeah,
Lynn,
it's great.
I'd love to hear any takeaways or mottos that you have.
Um, Something that I do personally hold close to heart is I do believe in paying it forward. I have been the beneficiary of that mantra that other people have held in so many ways. And I do think that if you hold on to that, you hold on to the importance of paying it forward, the importance of doing the right thing by people always, and that you can retain that integrity always in how you treat others, how you treat your borrowers, how you treat your investors, how you treat everyone around you, and pay it forward, then things fall the right way. So I do think that that does really come back.
I like
I
that
love
too.
Yeah.
And it's funny, I don't know how many of these we've done now. Let's say 6 or 8 or
Yeah.
whatever. I think it seems like that's something that's a common thread
It
of
is.
like half the people that are speaking. So I know that we all share that, but it seems like that's the one thing that seems to keep being repeated is do the right thing. Do the right thing for our borrowers and our clients and our employees and our investors and our partners. And so I
Mhm.
believe in that.
Yeah,
So I love it. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
do.
I always think it's a question of whether you should, not whether you can.
Mhm.
Right.
That's the
It's
difference.
a great way to think of it. Well, it was definitely a pleasure having the both of you on. I mean, two leaders in the industry, two role models,
Yes.
mentors. I know there's a lot of people in the industry that look up to you and want to model your success. So it was incredible having you two join us and kind
Yes.
of drop some gems for us and our viewers and listeners on your journey and how you got to where you are today.
And all the things that you're doing to keep living that for other people. And so just
Yeah.
setting the example. So we appreciate it. And thank you for being here.
Yes. And Jen, thank you for joining
Thank you
me
for allowing
again.
me to come
Yeah,
back.
dragging you on.
Yes.
And to all of our viewers and listeners, remember to stay informed, stay inspired, and stay on course to growing your financial platform. Until next time with On Deck with Haversine.